Right, so when a Prime Minister facing an International Criminal Court arrest warrant decides to defend his war by citing one of the most notorious atrocities of the 20th century, surely it becomes obvious that the mask is now irrevocably slipped. Benjamin Netanyahu's boast that Israel can bomb Gaza like Dresden was not a show of strength, but a Freudian slip on live TV. The kind of swaggering threat that lands less like Churchillian defiance and more like a mob boss bragging about how many civilians he could wipe out if he really wanted to. The problem for Netanyahu is that Gaza is already beyond Dresden. Tens of thousands dead, cities reduced to rubble, children dying of hunger. It was an insane instance on uncharacteristic honesty, even if the context was misleading. To invoke Dresden is not to warn of what Israel might do, but to confess to what it has already done, and then to threat to do it all again. Right, so Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has appeared on the American right-wing broadcaster Newsmax, a Trump favourite right now, which says it all, and said, "We can bomb Gaza like the Allies bombed Dresden." Now, he might have intended that to sound like bravado, but it sounded instead like a chilling boast, a confession even, you might say. Dresden, the German city incinerated in February of 1945, is remembered not as a triumph, but as an atrocity. A firestorm that killed tens of thousands and left Europe questioning the morality of modern warfare. To invoke it as a model is to cite atrocity as precedent. The irony of his comment, however, hasn't been missed on anyone paying more than even cursory attention to the goings-on in Gaza. Gaza is already a wasteland of rubble. Its cities have been flattened, its people starving under siege. By threatening Gaza with Dresden, Netanyahu ignored the abundantly obvious fact that Gaza has endured destruction beyond Dresden already. His words did not intimidate, they revealed. They revealed the mindset of a leader who treats historical atrocity as license, and they exposed Israel to even greater and deserved condemnation. Far from shielding his government, this analogy from their own leader's mouth has crystallized Israel's descent into pariah status, and can only have worked to accelerate Netanyahu's own political and legal collapse, which cannot come soon enough. The Dresden remark became emblematic of the contradictions in Israel's war. On one hand, it sought to project strength and deterrence to both domestic audiences and a sympathetic foreign media. On the other hand, it unintentionally confirmed what human rights groups and international observers have been saying for ages. That Gaza has been subjected to devastation so sweeping and indiscriminate that it bore resemblance not to legitimate military campaigns, but to the annihilation of entire cities. Netanyahu's attempt at defiance thus operated as a confession instead. To understand why Netanyahu's words resonated so appallingly and powerfully, it's worth going over the historical reality of Dresden, if you're not familiar with it. In February of 1945, the war in Europe was nearing its end. The Soviet Red Army was advancing rapidly from the east, while Western allies pressed into Western Germany. Dresden, a city of great cultural and architectural splendour on the River Elbe, had been spared the worst of the bombing campaigns that devastated cities such as Hamburg and Cologne. It was known for its opera house, its Baroque skyline, and its art collections, rather than for anything like heavy industry or military command centres. Yet over the nights of the 13th to the 15th of February, waves of British and American bombers descended upon it. Historical records indicate that Allied bombers dropped approximately 3,100 tons of high explosives and incendiary bombs on Dresden, around 2,700 tons by the RAF and another 400 tons by the US 8th Air Force. The resulting firestorm was catastrophic. Dozens of small fires converged into a raging inferno that sucked oxygen away from the shelters, causing many victims to suffocate or burn. Contemporary eyewitness accounts describe a scene of apocalyptic destruction, streets on fire, buildings collapsing and survivors incinerated amid searing heat, though precise temperature figures remain unverified. The death toll remains debated as well. Nazi propaganda spoke of hundreds of thousands, but scholarly studies based on forensic records and post-war inquiries estimate around 25,000 fatalities. What cannot be disputed, though, is the scale of cultural and physical destruction. Dresden's Frauenkirche collapsed into rubble. The Zwinger Palace was gutted. Tens of thousands of homes were obliterated, and hundreds of thousands displaced. What made Dresden especially controversial was its timing and the strategic ambiguity of the attack. By February of 1945, Germany was effectively beaten. The Nazi regime remained vicious and dangerous, but its defeat by that point was inevitable. Dresden was not a hub of armaments production. It did have rail junctions and some military-relevant facilities, but nothing that clearly justified the annihilation of the entire city. Critics argued the bombing was an act of terror designed to shatter morale and impress the Soviets with Western firepower. Even Winston Churchill, whose government had endorsed area bombing, later questioned it, writing that such attacks seemed like mere acts of terror and wanton destruction. Dresden thus entered history not as a military victory, but as a cautionary tale. Alongside the likes of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Tokyo, it symbolized the horrifying potential of modern warfare to obliterate entire civilian populations. The moral unease with Dresden fed directly into the post-war development of international humanitarian law. The Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals prosecuted many crimes, but largely sidestepped the question of Allied bombing. Yet legal scholars and diplomats still recognized that such destruction could not be left unaddressed. The Geneva Conventions of 1949 extended protections to civilians, prisoners of war, and the wounded. Most crucial were the 1977 additional protocols, drafted after decades of reflection on the Second World War's horrors. Protocol 1, Article 51, outlawed indiscriminate attacks. It explicitly forbade treating entire cities or towns as single military objectives. Article 52 enshrined protections for civilian objects, prohibiting their attack unless they directly contributed to military action. Article 57 imposed obligations of proportionality and precaution. Commanders must weigh military advantage against civilian harm and take steps to minimize the latter. Starvation was banned as a weapon of war. The International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, later codified these principles as customary international humanitarian law. The core rule was unmistakable. Area bombardments against populated cities are illegal. If Dresden could be rationalized in 1945, it could not be justified today. So when Netanyahu goes ahead and evokes Dresden in 2025, therefore, he did not just choose a vivid historical metaphor, he cited a case study that international law has deliberately defined as beyond the pale. In doing so, he strengthened the perception that Israel regards itself as above the law. Statistics from Gaza underscore why Netanyahu's analogy has been received as so damning too. As of this month, more than 62,000 Palestinians have been killed since the outbreak of Israel's campaign in October of 2023. That's according to the UN-cited official figures. And of course, we know the actual death toll will be considerably higher, given that 10% of Gaza's 2 million strong population can no longer be accounted for. This is more than double the casualties of Dresden at the official level, inflicted not in a few nights, but across nearly 2 years of bombardment. Satellite analyses by UNISAT confirmed that between 60 and 70% of Gaza's housing stock has been damaged or destroyed. It's gone. Entire neighbourhoods of Gaza City, of Khan Yunis, of Rafah lie in ruins. Hospitals, schools, mosques and UN facilities have been repeatedly struck. Where Dresden lost its historic centre, Gaza has lost virtually every urban district. The tonnage of ordnance dropped further highlights the disparity. Whereas Dresden was hit with 3,900 tonnes, rights groups estimate more than 70,000 tonnes have fallen on Gaza since October of 2023. This makes Gaza one of the most bombed territories in modern history, surpassing not only Dresden, but also the World War II bombings of London and Hamburg combined. Unlike Dresden, Gaza is subject to siege. Israel has cut electricity, fuel, and most imports, throttled humanitarian aid, and systematically obstructed convoys. The result is famine conditions. The UN confirmed that at least 98 children have died of malnutrition by this month, with thousands more at risk. Starvation is prohibited under Protocol 1, is here not a possibility, but an unfolding atrocity that's going on day after day, week after week. Thus, when Netanyahu threatens Gaza with a Dresden-style onslaught, it shouldn't surprise many people that so many are asking, well, what is left to destroy then? Gaza is already flattened. Its residents live in tents or among ruins. The only thing left to bomb is the displaced population itself. Historians were equally damning. Scholars of the Second World War stressed that Dresden is remembered precisely because it represents what not to do. To hold it up as precedent is to invert history's lessons, but this framing, historians have argued, is historically inaccurate and morally reckless. Gaza is not Nazi Germany. It is an occupied enclave of civilians, and that is true no matter how many Zionists compare the captive population to the Nazis, which they do incessantly, and yet somehow still manage to look at themselves in the mirror. Even allies struggled with this one. US Ambassador Mike Huckabee attempted to defend Netanyahu because, of course, he would. Christian evangelism goes hand in hand with Zionism unquestioningly. He decided to mock our British Prime Minister here, Keir Starmer, for actually opposing Israel's plans for total conquest of Gaza. I know, don't faint about that. And he repeated the Dresden analogy himself. Yet the effect was the opposite again. Rather than legitimise Israel's conduct, it highlighted the grotesque willingness of Israel's defenders to normalise absolute atrocity. The remark came as Israel's international standing is collapsing. Germany has halted arms exports usable in Gaza, and Norway's $2 trillion sovereign wealth fund has divested from 11 Israeli firms with a further 50 under consideration. Canada, the UK and France have moved towards recognising a Palestinian state. Next month, we'll see if it happens. Israeli cruise liners have faced protests in Greece. Across Europe, dock workers have been blocking shipments of arms to Israel. All stories this channel has covered in recent weeks, of course, as regular viewers will know. At the legal level, of course, the International Criminal Court has issued those arrest warrants for Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, citing war crimes including starvation of civilians. More arrest warrants are now in the works, apparently, against Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. Netanyahu's public invocation of Dresden strengthened perceptions of intent, providing prosecutors with rhetorical ammunition. And rather than defending himself, he had in effect supplied more evidence against himself by going on live TV and declaring that he should do to Gaza what was done in Dresden. The cumulative effect is Israel's transformation from embattled democracy to pariah state. Allies, once cautious about criticism, now find themselves compelled to distance. For Netanyahu personally, the Dresden analogy will likely be remembered as the moment he confirmed his own legal vulnerability. He's thrown himself under the bus with this one. Inside Israel, the picture is equally bleak for Netanyahu. Polling shows that 70% of Israelis no longer trust his government, including almost half of coalition party supporters. Protests and strikes are spread across cities, with demonstrators demanding a ceasefire and the release of the hostages. Significantly, 69% of Israelis say they would accept ending the war in exchange for the hostages' return, a stance at odds with Netanyahu's pledge of total victory, because of course the hostages mean nothing to him. Internationally, his reputation has nosedived. A Gallup poll reported by Newsweek found that 52% of Americans view him unfavourably, with only 29% favourable. His worst ever rating. It's still not bad enough, though. Approval for Israel's campaign has dropped to 32%, with only 10% of young Americans supporting it. Amongst Democrats, sympathy for Israel has nearly evaporated. The once ironclad bipartisan consensus is fractured, leaving Netanyahu dependent on US Republican elites while losing the wider American public. Thus, the Dresden remark functions not only as an international gaffe, but as a domestic liability now. It crystallised a broader sense that Netanyahu is out of touch, genocidal, reckless, and increasingly more and more isolated. The question remains, though, why on earth would Netanyahu invoke Dresden at all? The answer lies in the audience he was choosing to address. On Newsmax, addressing American conservatives, the analogy may have seemed resonant. For some US viewers, Dresden symbolises overwhelming Allied might, the crushing of Nazism, and the justice of total war. Netanyahu may have hoped to align Israel with that narrative. Yet globally, Dresden is not remembered as triumph, but as atrocity. The analogy therefore backfired. Historically, it misrepresents the reality. Dresden was a late-war terror bombing. Gaza is a civilian enclave under occupation. Legally, it incriminates. Dresden-style bombardment is prohibited today. Morally, it collapses. Citing atrocity as precedent reveals contempt for civilian life. Politically, it isolates. It pushes allies away and accelerates popular opposition. The result is that Netanyahu's attempt at bravado has accelerated the erosion of Israel's legitimacy and his own political credibility. Deservedly so. The Dresden analogy raises wider and more troubling questions on top of that, though. What does it reveal about a leader's mindset when he invokes a historical atrocity as precedent rather than warning? Does it signal that Israel has abandoned any pretense of proportionality? Does it reflect a broader erosion of global norms where states feel emboldened to flout humanitarian law without consequence? It also raises questions of memory. The Holocaust was long invoked by Israel as a moral shield for them, hasn't it? Now, by citing Dresden, Netanyahu appears to weaponize atrocity as license. It inverts the very purpose of historical remembrance, for heaven's sake. Rather than never again, it becomes again is fine, as long as it serves us. This appropriation of memory degrades both history and morality. It is foul. It is vile. Finally, there is the question of Gaza's place in future memory. Will Gaza become like Dresden or Guernica or Hiroshima, a symbol of atrocity that transcends its immediate context? Will the rubble of Gaza stand as the 21st century's icon of urban annihilation? If so, Netanyahu's analogy may prove prophetic in a way he never intended it to. Not by defending Israel, but by ensuring Gaza becomes the new Dresden in global consciousness. Benjamin Netanyahu's invocation of Dresden was not just reckless rhetoric, it was an inadvertent confession. He wanted to show strength, but instead he admitted to his own atrocities. He warned Gaza of a firestorm that has already consumed it. He cited a massacre remembered as unforgivable, and in doing so he aligned himself with it. The consequences of this are bluntly stark. Gaza today stands beyond Dresden. More dead, more destruction, famine added to bombardment. International law was written precisely to prevent another Dresden. Yet Netanyahu flaunted it as an option. The result has been Israel's deepening isolation, his own legal jeopardy before the ICC, collapsing trust at home and dwindling support abroad. The cause and effect are brutally clear. By threatening Gaza with Dresden, Netanyahu confirmed Gaza is already Dresden, and worse. And in the process he must surely have sealed his own political and moral downfall now. History will not remember his boast as a sign of strength, but as a moment of exposure, when a leader spoke aloud the atrocity he was already committing. More arrest warrants being issued for Israeli ministers simply backs this picture up, doesn't it? But the drawing up of ICC warrants against Smotrich and Ben-Gvir now are also historical firsts still, because nobody has ever been prosecuted for the crime of apartheid before. Intent is a pesky thing to prove, you see. Fortunately, just like Netanyahu, both have said the quiet part out loud in just the last week, which should by rights make the prosecutor's job a formality now. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.